Hi there and welcome to the channel of A Disappointed Man with me, Jason Kennedy, the Disappointed Man. And in this video, I'll be talking about this book, Gaston Leroux's 1911, The Phantom of the Opera. Now, this is, of course, an extremely well-known work due to the highly successful stage musical and the numerous movie adaptations over the years. However, how many of us have read the novel itself, and how many of us, like the Disappointed Man, have read it spoiler-free? Yes, I knew nothing about how this story unfolds. Now, in the case of a work like this, the life of the author is not really germane to the work itself. All I'll say is Gaston Leroux was, as the note at the start of my edition has it, a globe-trotting playboy who, upon the completion of a novel, would fire a pistol into the air. I'm sure he was very popular with the neighbours. Now, the narrative structure of The Phantom of the Opera is really interesting and highly intricate. It's what's known as an interpolated narration, because you have one strand which is happening at present, which in this case is Gaston Leroux himself investigating events of 30 years ago, and then you have the contents of the materials that he's relying upon, and also testimony he's gathering from people still alive, acquainted with the events in question. And so there are a few other writers I'm really into that use a similar technique. One of them, of course, is M.R. James, who I reviewed. I think it's review number 5. His antiquarian ghost stories rely upon this method, of course, because the events themselves are in the distant past, and there has to be some thread which allows them to reach the present day somehow. And it's really marvelous the way he will contrive to create this chain. Then another novel with which we might directly compare The Phantom of the Opera, which uses a similar method, is Bram Stoker's Dracula. Yes, you have journals, letters, interviews, doctor's notes, a ship's ledger. I love this approach. And there is a more recent example which I found very disappointing. Possession also practices the same method, and I would say that these two can really be directly compared, because they're both supposedly centered on these passionate relationships which are being excavated. However, Phantom of the Opera actually does it better, and I would argue is far superior in its organization, because there are numerous strands to the story, most of them centering upon rivalries. So you have a rivalry between the divas of the opera. You have a rivalry for Christine, one of the opera singers. On one side, you have the Viscount Chagny. On the other, the Phantom. And then we also have the rivalry between the brothers. One brother is in love with Christine. The other one is adamant that no marriage between the two must take place. It will be marrying far too much below. And then we also have this relationship between the Phantom, who calls himself the OG, when he's communicating with the management of the Paris Opera House. There's a kind of power struggle that goes on between them, with his demands such as a box number 5 has to be permanently reserved for his use, even though no one is ever seen in this box. And this new management try to make some changes, and this brings them into kind of open conflict with the ghost. So a lot is going on, and I would say the opening of the novel is its weakest part. It's rather lumpy, and there are so many characters being introduced, perhaps as many as 30 in this opening, that I found it difficult to get through this part. But after that, it began to open up. And the reason why I say it's better organized than A.S. Byatt's novel, for example, is that although there is this central mystery, who is the Phantom? What does he want? You never feel like just flicking forwards to try and advance a step nearer to the answer to this basic question, even though, of course, we're kept waiting until the very climax to learn the full truth. No, whichever moment we're at, whichever strand we're caught up in, it's always interesting enough in itself. And I have to say that's due to the invention displayed in The Phantom of the Opera. Within the world of the story, this invention is largely the product of the Phantom, whereas we as readers know it's the inventive powers of Gaston Leroux. But what's also interesting is there are sequences which have a kind of dream logic about them, which are really gripping as well. It's never this haphazard kind of invention. It all fits together into a really beautiful design. And interestingly, there is one chapter, one scene in this book which rivals one of my favorite scenes in the whole of literature, and that is from Mary Shelley's Frankenstein from 1818, and it's the scene in the mountains above the village of Chamonix when Victor consents to listen to the monster's account, and these implacably hostile figures sit there, and the monster subjects Victor to this tale, which is in its telling an act of profound sadism as he forces Victor to listen to how the monster has set out deliberately to destroy Clan Frankenstein. I was amazed to find in The Phantom of the Opera a very short chapter called Apollo's Lyre, which takes place on the roof of the Paris Opera House, which matches in many ways this scene in Frankenstein for its intensity. It's very rare to find a scene where at the moment an account is being given, the feeling is this tense. However, what Christine is relating to the Viscount Chagny is her history with the Phantom, and it's later that we learn that the Phantom was probably there listening to this, and it's not sadism in this case, but it's a tremendous act of betrayal, and we understand the Phantom's ensuing rage. And later we also learn there may even have been a fourth present at this dialogue, eavesdropping also, each character kind of watching the others. It's a marvelous contrivance. That fourth person is the Persian, who unfortunately is one of the weak points of this novel, but he's required because of the structure of the narrative. So let's just talk about him briefly. The Persian fulfills two vital functions in terms of the narrative. It simply would not be possible to say what took place during the climax without him, because the principles, none of them are available at the time the events are being reconstructed. And so the Persian is the person who was there, the eyewitness, and he also knows the history of the Phantom and will disclose this to us at the end. And so it did spoil to a degree the dramatic nature of this climax. It's difficult when you have this love triangle and then you have this fourth person there whom none of these characters are in love with. So I don't know how it's handled in the stage musical or the movie adaptations, but you just kind of have to accept that this problem that the Persian helps Leroux to solve, none of that can take away, however, from what a great book this was. There are two things further I wish to say. One is that despite the fact that we largely have to infer his character from his actions and from what other people say and write about him and the brief potted history the Persian provides, the character of the Phantom himself is a tremendous creation. We understand at the end, suddenly, the depths of his sorrow, the depths of his love for Christine, and also the depths of his rage, but also he's a tremendous polymath. He is a genius. He has his incredible musical ability. He is a master magician, and he's also an incredible engineer. It kind of surpasses belief that a single human being could have accomplished all that he has. Yes, that was wonderful. The last thing I wish to mention, it would be remiss if I did not touch upon it, is the sheer passion of this tale and the passion with which it is told. All in all, it was a wonderful reading experience, and even if you've watched the movies, been to see the stage play, I would still say it's worth picking up for yourself. And that's all I have to say. But before I depart, I will repeat my mantra, of course. Be safe, be strong, and until the next time, Nanu Nanu.